the manuscript is written in a way that nobody else could read it, suggests that it is preserving knowledge that someone wanted to keep secret.
Scientists asked AI to reanalyze the Voynich Manuscript. What the AI sent back stopped the researchers cold. This is a 600-year-old book that has defeated every codebreaker, linguist, and intelligence agency that has ever studied it. Now, the most powerful pattern recognition technology ever built has looked directly at it. And instead of an answer, it returned something far more unsettling. Not a translation, not a breakthrough, a confirmation that this manuscript doesn't just resist decoding. It behaves like something specifically engineered to make decoding impossible. Think about that. A medieval book written before computers, before modern cryptography, before AI even existed as a concept. And it is winning every single time. What the AI found inside those pages doesn't close this mystery. It tears it wide open and reveals something nobody was prepared for. And once you understand what the results actually showed, you will never look at this book the same way again. The world's most mysterious book. Let's back up, because you need to understand what this thing actually is before you can appreciate why what the AI found is so disturbing. Somewhere inside Yale University's Bennecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, locked in a climate-controlled vault, sits a small book roughly the size of a modern paperback. Its pages are made of calfskin vellum, worn soft by 6 centuries of existence. And covering nearly every inch of those pages is something that has driven historians, cryptographers, linguists, codebreakers, and now some of the most powerful AI systems ever built to the edge of what they're capable of. Strange flowing symbols that look like letters but match no known alphabet. Illustrations of plants that don't exist anywhere in the natural world. Circular astronomical diagrams mapping stars in configurations no one has matched to any known star catalog. Rows of small figures bathing in elaborate blue-green pools connected by mysterious tubes. And running through all of it, page after dense page, text written in a script that no one in over 600 years of continuous effort has ever convincingly decoded. Here's the deal. This is the Voynich Manuscript. Carbon dating conducted in 2009 by the University of Arizona's Radiocarbon Lab established 95% probability that the vellum came from animals that died between 1404 and 1438. This book is genuinely medieval, genuinely ancient, and genuinely, stubbornly, impossibly silent about what it contains. It's named after Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. Though he had nothing to do with writing it, nobody knows who did. Nobody knows why. The manuscript contains roughly 240 pages, divided into what appear to be thematic sections. Botanical illustrations, astronomical diagrams, what researchers call a biological section, with those strange bathing figures, a pharmaceutical section, and long stretches of text that read like recipes or instructions for something. Every section raises more questions than it answers. The plants match no known species. The astronomical charts match no historical catalog. And the text, always the text, flows on, dense and deliberate and utterly unreadable. Here's what makes this uniquely maddening. The Voynich manuscript doesn't read like nonsense. It reads like language. The symbols organize into word-like units with internal structure, as if obeying grammar. Lines run left to right. Paragraphs are organized. Margins are respected. Whoever wrote this wasn't scribbling randomly. They were writing deliberately, carefully, at sustained length in a system they either knew deeply or had constructed to look like they did. That apparent coherence is what has kept researchers coming back for 6 centuries. And that same coherence is what makes it so disturbing that the best AI in the world still can't read it. If you want to be here the day someone finally breaks this open, because when it happens, it will change everything we know about medieval history and cryptography, hit subscribe right now. This channel covers every breakthrough the moment it lands. Now, let's talk about what AI actually found when it looked. AI enters the room. Researchers have been running computational tools against the Voynich Manuscript for decades. But in recent years, with the explosion of modern natural language processing and machine learning, the attempts got serious, seriously sophisticated, and seriously strange in what they returned. The most widely discussed attempt came from Greg Kondrak and Bradley Hauer, researchers at the University of Alberta's Artificial Intelligence Lab. Their methodology, published in the journal Transactions of the Association for Computational Linguistics, was designed to identify the source language of ciphered texts using AI. It was rigorous, peer-reviewed, and legitimately cutting-edge. To stress-test the system, they aimed it at the hardest target they could find. They aimed it at the Voynich Manuscript. Here's the catch. Their algorithm analyzed samples from 400 different languages, running statistical comparisons across the full breadth of documented human writing. The initial signal pointed toward Arabic. Then the full results came back, and the algorithm said Hebrew, most probable underlying language with high confidence. Working from that finding and applying the additional hypothesis that the text was encoded through alphabetical scrambling, treating each word as an anagram, Kondrak and Hauer attempted a partial translation. The first line of the Voynich manuscript they proposed reads as, "She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me and people." That sentence made international news. Outlets ran headlines about AI finally cracking the code. The story spread to every corner of the internet, and then the experts weighed in. Lisa Fagan Davis, executive director of the Medieval Academy of America, sat down with the paper and delivered a verdict that was blunt to the point of being surgical. An algorithm trained on modern language samples, she explained to The Verge, cannot reliably identify the language of a 15th century scientific manuscript because the grammar, spelling, and vocabulary of that era would have been dramatically different from any modern reference point. The algorithm, Davis said, produces suggestions for potential matches. It does not evaluate whether those matches are actually probable. And get this, Kondrak and Hauer themselves admitted in the paper that the initial translation attempt was, in their own words, not quite coherent. They had to make what they called a couple of spelling corrections just to get it to approach anything resembling sense in Hebrew. Computational linguist Argamon, at his desk at the Illinois Institute of Technology, read through the methodology and reached a different kind of conclusion. Their method, he said, gives the researchers enormous latitude in interpretation. And what they did was take their decoded output, squint at it through thick glasses, and declare it good enough. Nick Pelling, who has spent years writing about the Voynich manuscript and has produced multiple books on the subject, didn't mince words either. The probability of the Hebrew hypothesis being correct, Pelling said, is so close to 0%, as makes no practical difference. The AI had looked at the Voynich manuscript. It had searched 400 languages. It had pointed at Hebrew, produced something that barely resembled a sentence, and called it a day. The scholars had rejected the methodology entirely. But here's what nobody talked about in those headlines. The AI's failure wasn't random. It wasn't just noise. There was something in the pattern of that failure, something that a closer look at the data made impossible to ignore. And that's where this gets genuinely disturbing. what AI can actually do, and where it breaks down. Before we get to the disturbing part, you need to understand what AI is actually capable of, because the gap between what it can do and what it couldn't do here is the whole story. Modern machine learning and natural language processing systems are extraordinary at pattern recognition. Feed them enough data, and they will find recurring structures that no human could spot manually. They identify statistical regularities, map relationships between symbols, compare features against millions of reference points simultaneously. For a text with as many unusual properties as the Voynich Manuscript, these are genuinely powerful tools, and they have delivered real results. In 2014, Diego Amancio's team at the University of São Paulo published research that analyzed the structural relationships between words in the Voynich text, not trying to translate it, just mapping how its words clustered and related to each other statistically. Their conclusion was significant. In 90% of cases, the statistical systems of the Voynich text resembled those found in other known books. It behaved like a real language, not random gibberish, not meaningless noise, something structured, something purposeful, something that was, at least statistically, trying to communicate. Here's the deal. That finding should have been the opening AI needed. Deep learning researchers have since run neural network comparisons between Voynich symbols and characters from known writing systems. Some analyses pointed toward Italian, others toward Latin, others toward entirely different language families. Research teams using different methods and different assumptions arrived at completely contradictory conclusions. Every AI system that analyzed the Voynich manuscript produced a different answer. That's not a glitch. That's the manuscript winning. Because here's the fundamental problem. And this is where the disturbing thread the title promised really starts to unspool. AI's power at finding patterns is completely inseparable from a limitation that nobody talks about enough. It finds correlations, but it cannot evaluate meaning. It can tell you that Voynich text statistically resembles natural language. It cannot tell you what that language says. It can generate candidate languages. It cannot verify that those candidates point toward anything real. Thea Summershield and Yannis Assel, in their comprehensive 2023 survey, Machine Learning for Ancient Languages, published in Computational Linguistics, noted that even the most advanced transformer models, the same architecture powering today's large language models, have fundamental constraints when applied to genuinely unknown writing systems. Without a bilingual key, without a Rosetta Stone, without any confirmed fragment of decoded text to use as an anchor, there is no validation possible. Pattern recognition without meaning is just pattern recognition. And get this, every AI analysis has to begin with an assumption about what kind of document it's looking at. Is it a substitution cipher? An anagram cipher? A natural language in an unfamiliar alphabet? A constructed language? A deliberate hoax? Each assumption leads to a completely different computational approach, and none of them can be tested against each other because there is no ground truth. That's not a problem that more computing power solves. The challenge isn't computational speed, it's epistemic. We don't know enough about what we're looking at to design a search that reliably finds the right answer rather than the most statistically plausible wrong one. But when researchers started putting all of these failed analyses together, when they stepped back and looked at the shape of the failures rather than just the failures themselves, something emerged that changed the conversation entirely. The disturbing reality AI didn't expect. Here is where the title earns its second word. When multiple AI systems analyze the same unknown text and each confidently returns a different answer, that's not just a technical failure. That's a data point about the text. And when you line up all the data points from all the failed AI analyses of the Voynich manuscript, a coherent picture starts to form. And it is not a comfortable one. Think about what AI can do when it has the right conditions. In 2022, a deep learning model called Ithaca, developed at Google DeepMind by a team including Yannis Assel, achieved 62% accuracy restoring missing text in ancient Greek inscriptions, outperforming human experts working alone. That's AI cracking ancient scripts. That's AI succeeding where human analysts had struggled for generations. The tools are real. The capability is real. And yet, the Voynich manuscript stares back, unchanged. Here's the catch. The reason this is disturbing isn't simply that AI failed, it's what the failure implies. Every sophisticated computational system that has analyzed the Voynich text and produced results that specialists cannot validate adds to an accumulating body of evidence about the manuscript's fundamental nature. Some researchers believe it encodes an unknown natural language. Others believe it involves a cipher of unusual structural complexity. Others have proposed it's a constructed language, built from scratch, with deliberate internal logic that mimics natural language statistically, but contains no recoverable meaning without an original key that may no longer exist. And then, there's the possibility that the researchers who look most carefully tend not to say out loud that the manuscript was deliberately architected to defeat decoding. That someone, 600 years ago, constructed a system sophisticated enough to pass AI pattern recognition tests for natural language structure while remaining completely impenetrable to meaning extraction. That the statistical language likeness the AI detects is not an accident or a byproduct. It's the point. It's the defense mechanism. It was designed to look exactly real enough that every analyst who touched it would be convinced they were close and would never stop trying. And get this, a 15th century scribe working without computers, without knowledge of statistical linguistics, without any awareness that pattern recognition machines would one day study their creation, somehow produced a text that defeats those machines at exactly the game they're best at. Either that person was operating at a level of cryptographic sophistication that was centuries ahead of their time, or the manuscript contains real meaning encrypted in a system our methods still can't reach. Or, perhaps most unsettling of all, our methods are not yet advanced enough to tell the difference. Every new AI analysis that returns no validated answer is a vote for one of those three options. The votes are piling up, and they are pointing somewhere specific. But wait, because right when the AI approach hit what looked like a permanent wall, a completely different kind of researcher came at the problem from a direction no one had tried. And what he found didn't solve the mystery, it deepened it in a way that changes what we're even asking, a new clue that only made things stranger. In late 2025, science journalist and independent researcher Michael Greshko published a paper in the peer-reviewed journal Cryptologia that the Voynich research community immediately took seriously. Not because it decoded the manuscript, because it proved something that had only been theoretical. Greshko's approach was the opposite of every AI analysis that came before it. Instead of pointing a system at the Voynich text and asking what it said, he asked a different question entirely. Could a 15th century person, using only tools available in 15th century Europe, have constructed a cipher that produces text with exactly the statistical properties the Voynich manuscript displays? He built one. He called it the Naib cipher, named after a 14th century Italian word for a card game. It's a verbose, homophonic substitution cipher that maps individual letters in a Latin or Italian plaintext onto multiple distinct sequences of glyphs, with the specific mapping determined by dice rolls and playing card draws, both of which were widely available in 15th century Europe. Here's the deal. When Greshko ran the Naib cipher on sample texts, including the opening of Julius Caesar's De Bello Gallico, what came out the other side was eerily recognizable. The frequency distribution of symbols matched Voynich text. The typical length of words matched. Positional patterns, the tendency for certain symbols to cluster at the beginnings or ends of words, matched. Even fragments of the original linguistic structure were preserved in the form of short letter sequences, despite no single glyph consistently corresponding to a single plaintext letter. Greshko was precise about what this does and does not prove. Sitting with the results of his own work, he told Live Science, "The Naib cipher is almost certainly not the way that the manuscript was constructed. What it proves is that this level of statistical mimicry was achievable with medieval tools. The cipher text hypothesis, the theory that the Voynich text encrypts a real language, doesn't just remain viable. It gets a mechanism, a plausible, historically accurate, hand-executable mechanism. But here's what nobody expected. The Naib cipher's success at mimicking Voynich text also implies something about the cipher's complexity. Any system capable of producing this degree of statistical language likeness from Latin or Italian would have been extraordinarily sophisticated to construct. Not beyond a 15th century genius, but not the work of someone casually encoding a herbal recipe either. Greshko's own words about the manuscript make the stakes plain. "It's hard to even speculate on the nature of the Voynich manuscript," he said, "because to my endless fascination and frustration, it holds up a mirror to whatever idea you have for it." A mirror. Think about that. Every approach reflects the assumptions of the person holding it. AI sees language-like patterns and concludes it might be language. Greshko builds a cipher, and the output looks like Voynich. The manuscript agrees with every hypothesis, just enough to keep the believer hooked, and refutes every hypothesis just enough to prevent closure. That is not what an accidentally mysterious book does. That is what a deliberately designed one does. And new evidence is now pointing carefully and specifically at who might have designed it and why. Why this still matters and what it might mean. At this point you might be thinking, 600 years of study, cutting-edge AI, a published cipher that mimics the text perfectly, and we still don't know anything? Why does any of this matter? Here's why. Because every layer we peel back reveals that the Voynich manuscript is more historically specific than it looks. This isn't just a generic mystery. There are fingerprints on it, faint ones, but real. Historian Johannes Hartlieb was a Bavarian physician who lived in the early to mid-1400s, contemporaneously with the manuscript's construction. He wrote explicitly about the use of secret alphabets and cipher writing to conceal medical knowledge, specifically knowledge relating to women's health, contraception, and gynecological procedures. Hartlieb's reasoning was explicit. He feared that such information becoming widely available could facilitate extramarital sex and that God would condemn him for allowing it. He recommended encoding it. He wrote about encoding it. And critically, his secret alphabet has never been found. And get this. Historians Kate Brewer and Michelle Lewis, writing in Social History of Medicine in 2024, propose that some of the Voynich manuscript's content relates specifically to this tradition of deliberately concealed women's medical knowledge. The botanical illustrations, the bathing figures, the pharmaceutical drawings. In their reading, these are not fantastical or mystical. They are practical, medical, encoded by someone who understood exactly what they were hiding and exactly who they were hiding it from. This doesn't decode the cipher, but it provides a historically grounded motive. The Voynich manuscript was not trying to communicate with everyone. It was trying to communicate with specific readers who already held the key and to be impenetrable to everyone else, including, it turns out, 21st century AI. The manuscript is accumulating new evidence alongside these historical clues. In September 2024, multispectral scans of 10 selected pages were made publicly available for the first time, revealing details completely invisible to previous analysis. Lisa Fagan Davis has developed evidence suggesting the pages are not in their original order, a finding with massive implications for any interpretation attempt. Yale professor Claire Bowern is now analyzing whether different sections were written by different scribes, possibly in different languages or dialects. These are new facts emerging right now about a 600-year-old book. Here's the deal. In 2024 alone, more than 150,000 users searched Yale Library's digital collections specifically for the Voynich Manuscript, making it the third most popular search on that platform. In an age when AI can answer almost anything you can type, this book remains a question that hasn't been answered. That's not just a curiosity. That's a kind of defiance, a mystery far from solved. The Voynich Manuscript is a genuine 15th century document, carbon dated to between 1404 and 1438, housed at Yale University, filled with text in an unknown script, surrounded by illustrations ranging from botanically plausible to completely fantastical. In over 600 years of study, including work by the Bletchley Park codebreakers during World War II, no one has produced a verified translation. No one has established what language it was written in, what cipher encodes it, who wrote it, or what it was for. Artificial intelligence has been brought to bear through multiple approaches: natural language processing, machine learning, deep learning, statistical analysis. The results have generated hypotheses: Hebrew, Latin, Italian, Old Turkish. But no consensus, no validated translation, no solution that survived expert scrutiny. When Kondrak and Hauer's AI pointed at Hebrew and produced a partial translation, Lisa Fagan Davis, Argamon, and Nick Pelling each independently rejected it. When Diego Amancio's statistical analysis showed the text behaves like a natural language 90% of the time, that finding made the mystery more precise, not more solved. What AI has confirmed, with the full weight of every analytical tool applied to it, is this: the Voynich text is genuinely unusual in a way that is structural, not accidental. It passes tests for natural language. It defeats tests for language identification. It displays statistical properties consistent with real cipher systems. It resists every attempt to recover meaning from those properties. That combination, coherent structure, total resistance to interpretation, is not what random gibberish produces. And it is not what a simple hoax produces either. Michael Greshko's Naive a Cipher, published in Cryptologia in late 2025, proved that a 15th century scribe with dice, playing cards, and a working knowledge of Latin could have constructed something with this manuscript's statistical signature. It narrowed what was possible. It did not identify what happened. The mystery is better mapped than ever before. It is not closer to solved. And here's the thing that keeps the researchers up at night, the thing that the headlines about AI failing consistently miss. The failure isn't uniform. It isn't random. Every time a new AI system analyzes the Voynich text and returns a result, that result tells us something about the manuscript's architecture. Hebrew shows up in one analysis. Italian echoes appear in another. Latin letter frequency patterns surface in a third. The text is not refusing to yield information. It seems to be yielding just enough information to keep every analyst convinced they're on the verge of a breakthrough, and then pulling the rug out at the moment of resolution. That's not how an accidental mystery behaves. That's how a designed one does. 600 years ago, someone sat down with calfskin vellum and prepared pigments in green and blue and red and began to write. They drew plants no botanist has identified. They mapped stars no astronomer has matched. They filled 240 pages with a script that has survived every codebreaker, every algorithm, and every AI system thrown at it, and come out the other side not just intact, but seemingly stronger, more resistant, more precisely deliberately, architecturally impenetrable. Whoever they were, whatever they were hiding, they built something that outlasted their century, outlasted every attempt to understand it, and is now outlasting artificial intelligence itself. That is not a small achievement. That is one of the most remarkable intellectual feats in the documented history of human civilization. And we still don't know who did it. AI stared at those pages. It found patterns. It pointed in every direction at once. It ultimately went quiet. The Voynich Manuscript didn't crack under the pressure of the most powerful pattern recognition tools in human history. It stared back, unchanged, unreadable, and somehow deeper in mystery for having been studied this hard. Whatever it's hiding, it was built to keep hiding it. And it's winning. If you're staying with this mystery, and you should be, because this is the kind of story that breaks open without warning, subscribe now. Because the day someone finally finds the key to this manuscript, it won't just be a footnote in cryptography. It will rewrite what we know about medicine, secrecy, and the limits of human intelligence across 6 centuries. You'll want to be here for that.